Faerie.
When I was a kid, I would race up to the top of the stairs as fast as I could, like it was some sort of silly game. Well, I must have been 5 or 6 at the time. I'm not sure, but I know I was very little. Somewhere along the way, a voice at the top of the stairs started to whisper to me. It would make bets with me, such as, "I bet you a penny you can't make it to the top of the stairs." I don't really think there was a certain amount of time or anything. As I said, I was very little, so I probably didn't have any counting abilities anyway. I recall just sitting at the top of the stairs, having conversations with this voice about the betting, of course. Eventually the voice, it was like a whisper of a man's voice, not my own voice in my head, started to bet me my life. Instead of pennies, it'd say, "I bet you your life you can't make it up the stairs." As I got older, it stopped. I never really thought about it at all. I never mentioned it to anyone until one night I was sleeping over at my brother's place and we were talking about spooky stories. Out of nowhere, I brought up the voice at the top of the stairs and my brother got all quiet. Before I even mentioned anything, he said, "Did it make bets with you?" We both looked at each other horrified. This didn't happen to me, but it happened to my aunt, and it's so freaky I'll never forget it. My aunt and uncle bought a cool old Victorian in a small town about 40 miles away from Austin. It was a really pretty awesome old place and had a historical marker in the front lawn and everything. My aunt and uncle moved for job reasons years ago, and the house is now a successful bed and breakfast. Why anyone would pay money to sleep there is beyond me. When my aunt and uncle were still living in the house, their daughter and her young son also lived with them. Chad, the son, was about 7 at the time. One day, my aunt was home alone. My uncle and her daughter were both at work. Chad was at school, and the lady who cleaned the house had already come and gone for the day. My aunt was in the study working on a project or something. In this house, if you sat at the desk in the study, you had clear view of the foot of the stairs. My aunt was sitting there on the computer when she looked up and saw a young boy sitting at the foot of the stairs, staring at her. He was about the same age as Chad, and she assumed he was a friend from school. She asked the kid his name and he didn't answer. She thought he was weird, so she told him he needed to be in school or to go on home. She looked down for a second, and when she looked up, he was gone. When Chad got home from school that day, she told him one of his friends had been in the house. He said, "No way. All my friends were at school with me." She described the boy, and Chad got real quiet. He said, "Oh yeah, I know him. He comes out of my closet to play sometimes at night." Unnerved, my aunt and cousin told him to go play outside and stop telling wild stories. A couple of months later, my aunt was doing research on the history of the house and found out that a young boy, aged 8, had died there of leukemia in the 70s. She found an old newspaper article about his death, with a picture she recognized. He was the same boy who had been staring at her on the stairs that day. About 10 years ago, my 3-year-old son and I moved into a new house. Well, it was new to us, but it was actually a very old house. The inside of the house always seemed to be just a little darker and a little colder than it should be. I had noticed that the first time I went to view the house, but as it was summer, I figured it would save on cooling costs. Soon after we moved in, a friend of mine came by. We were sitting and talking for a few minutes, but she seemed uncomfortable the whole time. Then I saw in her face that something in the other room caught her attention. Her eyes got big and she said she had to go. I asked her what was wrong, but she said she didn't want to tell me. I kept after her because her reaction was kind of freaking me out. On her way out the door, she finally said, "This house is haunted," but she wouldn't tell me what made her think so. Still to this day, 10 years later, she refuses to tell me what she saw. About a week after that night, my 3-year-old son casually asked me who the lady in the bathroom was. One day I was leaving for work, but once I got to the car, I realized I needed to run back in the house to get something. I walked into the house, and as soon as I got inside, this framed photo on the wall shot off the wall. Now, I don't mean it fell because of some issue with the nail or anything like that. It shot horizontally away from the wall, not vertically down, and it landed on a mosaic table with enough force to break some of the tiles off of it. I felt like whatever was in the house was pissed that I came back in after it thought I had left for the day. After living in the house for about 6 months, I noticed a weird square cut into the boards on the deck. There was no handle, but I was able to pry it up. The hole was just big enough to fit through, and there was a ladder going down. For some reason, I went down and found myself in what looked like a homemade basement. It was basically just a room dug out of the earth, no constructed walls or stone supports or anything like you would expect if it was a basement that was built with the house. It was very dark, but I could see over in the corner a suspicious-looking large stone. It looked like one of those light-colored 100-year-old headstones that you see in old cemeteries. Just then, some camel crickets started jumping at me, so I got myself out of the basement as fast as I could and never went back. Now this is the part that affected me most and the reason we left the house. One night I was in bed but not yet asleep, laying on my stomach. I heard someone walk into the room. I heard footsteps come from the doorway over to my bed. I didn't realize until later that the fact that I heard the footsteps was weird because the room was carpeted. When the footsteps reached my bed, I felt someone put their hands on my back. 2 hands just gently laid flat on my back and kept there. I assumed it was my son. I said, "What are you doing?" But no one answered. I looked up and no one was there. I got up and checked my son's bedroom, but he was in bed asleep. We moved out soon after that.